In January 2001, two casino executives and a boxing promoter walked into a room and wrote a check for $2 million. What they bought? A brand so toxic it was illegal in 36 states. A sport Senator John McCain had called human cockfighting. A company with zero television deals, zero sponsors, and zero path to profitability. 4 years later, they were $44 million in the hole. The Fertitta brothers had drained their casino fortune into a money pit that wouldn't stop bleeding. They were days away from selling, for $8 million. Less than a quarter of what they'd lost. And then, one man made a single decision. A $10 million gamble that every business advisor, every financial analyst, every rational human being told him was insane. That decision saved the company. It's the reason today's UFC is a $21 billion empire with $1.5 billion in annual revenue. It's the single best business bet in sports history. And almost nobody understands why it worked. By the time you finish this video, you won't just know what that decision was. You'll understand the exact business physics that turned a $10 million Hail Mary into the most valuable combat sports organization that has ever existed. To understand the decision, you have to understand how dead this company was. In 1993, the first UFC event was held in Denver, Colorado. The pitch was simple. No rules. No weight classes. No time limits. Put fighters from different disciplines in a cage and see who wins. It was brutal, it was shocking, and it got attention, the wrong kind of attention. John McCain launched a crusade. He wrote letters to all 50 governors demanding they ban the sport. By 2001, 36 states had made it illegal. Pay-per-view distributors started dropping UFC events. Cable networks wouldn't touch it. Sponsors wouldn't return phone calls. By the late 90s, the original owners of the UFC were desperately trying to get rid of it. That's when Bob Merowitz, the founder of Semaphore Entertainment Group, which owned the UFC, got a call from a young boxing promoter named Dana White. White had heard the UFC was for sale. He called his childhood friends, Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta, casino owners in Las Vegas. The Fertittas were fans. They'd watched the early events. They saw something nobody else saw. In January 2001, they paid $2 million. For that, they got the UFC trademark, a rusty octagon, and the right to operate in the handful of states where the sport wasn't literally illegal. Think about that. They paid $2 million for an asset that was illegal in most of the country, banned from television, and considered a public menace by the United States Senate. That wasn't a business purchase. That was a rescue mission. But here's what's fascinating. The Fertittas weren't stupid. They saw what the critics missed. The UFC had a core audience, small, but rabid. Pay-per-view buy rates, while tiny, were consistent. The problem wasn't the product. The problem was that nobody could see the product. And if they could solve the distribution problem, they might have something. They bet $2 million on that theory. They'd lose another $42 million before it paid off. From 2001 to 2004, the UFC hemorrhaged money. The Fertittas poured cash into the business, promoting events, signing fighters, lobbying state athletic commissions one by one to legalize the sport. But every dollar they spent seemed to generate 90 cents back. They tried pay-per-view. The numbers were dismal. They tried live events. The crowds were tiny. Without television, they had no way to grow the audience. Without the audience, they had no leverage for sponsorships or bigger venues. They were trapped in a death spiral. By 2004, the losses totaled $44 million. The Fertittas' casino partners were furious. Their advisors were telling them to cut their losses. Frank Fertitta wanted out. Lorenzo was barely hanging on. Dana White was the only one still convinced they were sitting on gold. And then it nearly ended. The Fertittas received an offer to sell the UFC. For $8 million. Less than a fifth of what they'd invested. Frank was ready to take it. Lorenzo was torn. Dana White was against it. He believed, genuinely believed, that they were one move away from breaking through. The meeting where the decision was made, the single meeting that changed everything, is the most important 60 minutes in combat sports history. And the move they landed on was so counterintuitive, so against every business instinct, that nobody in the industry saw it coming. Lorenzo Fertitta called the meeting. Him, Frank, and Dana. The options were simple. Option 1, sell for $8 million, lose $36 million, walk away. Option 2, keep bleeding cash on pay-per-views nobody was buying. Lorenzo had a third option. He wanted to produce a reality television show. Take 16 unknown fighters. Put them in a house. Film them training, fighting, living together. A single elimination tournament where the winner got a UFC contract. They would call it The Ultimate Fighter. And here's the decision that changed everything. The UFC would pay for it themselves. $10 million. Their own money. Produced by their own team. No network was going to pay for a show about a sport they wouldn't even broadcast. So the UFC would assume all the risk. They'd produce the show, then find a network willing to air it. Spike TV agreed. But only barely. They accepted the show on a one-season deal. They paid no production costs. The UFC funded the entire thing, $10 million, on top of the $44 million they'd already lost. One season. If it didn't work, they were done. Let me say that again. They were $44 million in the hole. They had an offer to sell for $8 million. And instead of taking it, they invested another $10 million, their own money, into a reality TV show about a banned sport. This is not a business strategy. This is a casino bet, made by casino owners. Dana White later called it our Trojan horse. The show wasn't about making money on television. It was about getting inside cable, getting past the gatekeepers who'd locked them out for a decade. The Ultimate Fighter wasn't a TV show. It was a distribution hack. And the hack worked. But not for the reason anyone expected. The first season of The Ultimate Fighter aired in early 2005. It was fine. Solid ratings, not spectacular. The show built an audience slowly, introducing viewers to the fighters, the training, the drama, the humanity behind a sport they'd only seen as violence. But the finale, live on Spike TV, April 9, 2005, is what changed the trajectory of the entire company. Forrest Griffin vs. Stephan Bonnar. Two light heavyweights. The winner got a six-figure UFC contract. Neither man was a star. Neither man was famous. But what happened in that octagon over the next 15 minutes is the single most important fight in MMA history. Round 1, absolute war. Both men throwing everything. Neither backing down. Round 2, somehow more violent than round 1. Blood, exhaustion, pure will. Round 3, the crowd on its feet, the Spike TV producers watching the ratings in real time, and the numbers doing something they'd never seen. The viewership started climbing. And climbing. And climbing. During the fight, Spike TV's ratings almost doubled. Live. On the air. People called their friends. Friends tuned in. By the end of the third round, 10 million people had watched some portion of the fight. The finale drew the highest ratings Spike TV had ever recorded. Dana White has said, repeatedly, that if Griffin vs. Bonnar had been a boring fight, if they'd spent 3 rounds circling each other, he believes the UFC would have gone under within weeks. The show would have been cancelled. The money would have run out. The $8 million offer wouldn't come back. One fight. 2 unknown fighters. 15 minutes. That's how thin the line between collapse and empire actually was. And that's the part of this story most people miss. The decision, the $10 million bet on The Ultimate Fighter, was brilliant. But it still almost failed. If those 2 men hadn't delivered the fight of their lives, the decision would have been remembered as the final, desperate mistake that finished the company. So what made the aftermath different? What turned a lucky break into a $4 billion exit? The night of April 9, 2005, the UFC had its proof of concept. Millions of people had now seen what MMA actually was, not a bar fight, not a street brawl, but a legitimate sport with elite athletes. The next morning, everything changed. Spike TV ordered a second season before the blood on the canvas was dry. The UFC suddenly had a weekly cable presence. And cable presence meant they could promote pay-per-views. And pay-per-view promotion, on a real cable network, meant buy rates started climbing. Here are the numbers. In 2005, the year of The Ultimate Fighter, UFC pay-per-view buys jumped by 40%. Live event tickets started selling. Sponsorship calls, for the first time, were incoming instead of outgoing. The gate revenue, the merchandise, the international rights, every piece of the business that had been dormant sprang to life. By 2008, the UFC was generating over $300 million annually. By 2010, it had surpassed boxing in professional wrestling and pay-per-view revenue. In 2011, they signed a 7-year broadcast deal with Fox worth $100 million a year. The same networks that wouldn't take their calls in 2004 were now writing them 9-figure checks. Then July 11, 2016, WMIMG, now Endeavor, purchased the UFC for $4.025 billion. The biggest sale in sports history. So the lesson is, produce great content and you'll succeed. Right? That's the story everyone tells. The scrappy underdogs who bet everything on a TV show and won. That's not wrong. But it's not the full lesson. The $2 million to $4 billion return, a 2,000x multiple, makes this the best single investment in sports history. In 2023, Endeavor merged UFC with WWE to form TKO Group Holdings. In 2025, TKO reported $1.5 billion in UFC revenue alone. The enterprise is now valued at over $21 billion. But the Fertittas sold. They took the $4 billion. And Dana White stayed on as president, with a reported stake in the new entity worth hundreds of millions. The decision, the single decision to self-fund The Ultimate Fighter, unlocked everything. But it wasn't the TV show that created the billions. The TV show was the key. The value was in the asset it unlocked. And that asset was something nobody was looking at. Here's what the Fertittas and Dana White understood that nobody else did. The UFC wasn't a fight promotion. It was an intellectual property library. Every fight, every knockout, every submission, every rivalry, every championship moment, it was all content. Owned. Forever. In 2001, sports leagues sold tickets and TV rights. The UFC was doing something different. It was building a content library that could be monetized forever. Streaming rights, video game deals, international broadcast packages, digital platforms, gambling data. Every fight was an asset that would generate revenue for decades. The Ultimate Fighter wasn't just a distribution hack to get onto cable. It was the proof that MMA was content, not just a live event, not just a pay-per-view spectacle, but a storytelling medium. Characters, rivalries, training arcs, redemption narratives. The TV show taught the audience to follow fighters, not just fights. And that's what made the $4 billion sale possible. WMIMG wasn't buying a sports league. They were buying a content library. A global IP portfolio. A brand that could scale into markets the Fertittas had barely touched: China, India, the Middle East, Africa. The Fertittas built a sports league. But they sold a media company. And that's the lesson that applies to every industry we cover on this channel. Today, the UFC's media rights deal with ESPN is worth hundreds of millions annually. Their Fight Pass streaming platform has subscribers in over 150 countries. Their video game franchise with EA Sports generates tens of millions per release. Their gambling data partnerships with DraftKings and others produce revenue streams that didn't exist when the Fertittas bought in. The UFC is no longer dependent on any single fighter, any single event, or any single TV deal. It is a content ecosystem. And every year the library gets bigger. Every fight adds another asset. Every new star adds another franchise. That's the real billion-dollar secret. Not the TV show. Not the fight. The decision to stop thinking like a fight promoter and start thinking like a media company. Here's what I want you to remember. Dana White and the Fertittas made one decision that changed everything. They bet $10 million on a TV show nobody wanted to air, about a sport that was illegal in most of the country, funded entirely out of their own pocket, while they were already $44 million in the hole. That's not courage. That's clarity. They knew what they owned wasn't a fight league. It was a library. And all they needed was one window, one cable slot, to prove it. The Griffin vs. Bonner fight gave them that proof. The rest is history. But the decision came first. Sometimes the biggest fortunes aren't made by the people who play the game. They're made by the people who figure out what the game actually is. If you want the version of these stories the mainstream gets wrong, the real mechanics, the hidden forces, the second story, hit subscribe. We just dropped our breakdown of why every single NBA valuation is wrong, a massive lie the league depends on. Go watch it. And our deep dive into why owning a gas station is one of the worst financial traps in America. Both are right there on screen.